Northwestern exposure. Our panelists for this session are Anatol Lieven, Riaz Mohammad Khan, and Zahid Hussain. Our moderator for this session is Nasim Zehra. I would like to make a couple of announcements before we start the session. Please, everyone, first of all, I'd like to request you to take your seats. Secondly, if you have cell phones, either switch them off or switch them to silent. Thirdly, I would greatly appreciate it if silence was maintained throughout the session. There will be a question-answer session at the end. I would like you to keep your questions short and refrain from making comments so we can accommodate maximum number of questions. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Nasim Zehra. She's a prominent expert on national security and development strategy in South Asia. As an analyst in Pakistan's political experiences and international security issues, Ms. Zehra has written and lectured widely, nationally and internationally. She has also been a fellow of Harvard University Asia Center and has taught as an adjunct professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. She has served on Pakistan's Presidential Advisory Committee on Foreign Policy and National Security from 2000 to 2002 and was appointed as Pakistan's Special Envoy on UN reforms in 2005. Over to you, Nasim.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. This was too long an introduction, not needed, but I'm almost embarrassed. But warm welcome to everybody on this special session on Afghanistan. I see right in front of me a pillar of Pakistan's foreign policy, Riaz Sahar. We may request him through the program to also intervene. Afghanistan, for the session we have on our panel, Mr. Zahid Hussain. Very special thanks to Zahid Hussain, who agreed to join us at the last minute. He's a very well-known scholar and expert on Afghanistan, and he's one of those scholars who's been out in the field and knows Afghanistan for the last, 35 years, Zahid? Almost 35 years. Then we have, of course, Riaz Mohammad Khan Sahab, former Foreign Secretary, but somebody who has moved from being a bureaucrat. Well, actually he started as a teacher, as a professor in mathematics, then he joined the civil service, and he was in the foreign service. He rose to become the foreign secretary. Afghanistan, he picked it up as a scholarly subject as well, and he's written 2 books on Afghanistan. And Riaz Mohammad Khan Sahab was with the subject practically on the ground in the Foreign Office for almost, I think, 25-30 years. He was director, then he was additional secretary, then he was foreign secretary, and he dealt with Afghanistan through different phases of Pakistan's policy. And then we have Mr. Anatol Lieven, who is a scholar, professor, and has written on Afghanistan and Pakistan widely. He's been a journalist as well, and has again has experience and knowledge of the subject, from the ground level upwards. Afghanistan, why is Afghanistan important? I think as in Pakistan we keep hearing this term game changer for Pakistan-China relationship these days. I would submit to you that the term game changer in a negative sense, was Pakistan's, was the first intervention of Soviet Union in Afghanistan, invasion of Soviet Union of Afghanistan in 79, and subsequently a policy that Pakistan and US co-authored, and US created an enabling environment in which a policy which, the results of which we are still suffering from, we adopted. And obviously the international plane that was critical, and we keep talking about it. For Pakistan and globally, actually, the Afghan policy of the 80s onwards was a game changer, not just for Pakistan, but what we see today in terms of militancy, terrorism, and Islam, lumped into all of that. Really, the foundations for that were laid then in the 80s. We can come back to that, but our session is going to be really more about the future, where we see Afghanistan going now, and where we see Pakistan, therefore, going in terms of our relationship with Afghanistan, issues of security and peace and development. And last few months, especially since the new president of Afghanistan took over, President Ashraf Ghani, but last 2 months in terms of the great interaction between Pakistan and Afghanistan, there has been, I think it would be correct to say, a reset of Pakistan-Afghan relationship. And so where is this going to take us? Where is the whole question of Taliban going to place Afghanistan in terms of its security? What does it mean for Pakistan? What does Afghanistan do in terms of its relationship with the neighbors? And when we say neighbors, obviously Pakistan is critical, Iran is important, and India is no less critical because of the influence and the engagement, etc., that India has had with Afghanistan. So these are some of the questions that we are going to ask our panelists, and then we'll open the floor for questions from all of you. Zaid, I'd like to start with you, if I may. We are now seeing a reset of Afghanistan and Pakistan's relationship, and it seems that the area where we had the most problem, which was the security area, where in terms of security establishments of the two countries, and it wasn't so much security establishment. Has that changed enough now with the army chief coming and being a guest at the Kakul passing out parade? These are symbolic things, but obviously underlying this symbolism seems to be some radical changes. Are we going to be looking at more secure times because of this reset?
Thank you, Nasim. I think the security of the two countries has never been so intertwined as today, Afghanistan and Pakistan, particularly as we see Afghanistan undergoing three major transitions. I'm still saying undergoing because yet to be completed. First was political transition. The second is economic transition, and the third one is security transition. Well, the last year we have seen Afghanistan transfer of power from an elected to an elected president. But still, actually, the transition has not taken place completely. The second is, which is much more important, is the security transition. The Americans have decided to extend their stay, and now actually the major problem is economic transition, which is still actually the hardest to achieve. As far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan's greatest nightmare, which people will not believe, many people are still very skeptical about it, is the greatest nightmare is the Taliban takeover, even part of Afghanistan. So it is not, I don't think it's possible that Taliban will occupy or take over Kabul in any way. The situation has changed. It's no more 1990 situation. But certainly when we say Taliban, they in fact actually have a lot of influence in certain areas. And most of those areas are located adjacent to Pakistan. And Pakistan itself is fighting its own battle against the militant. And I believe that there is a very thin line between Afghan Taliban and Pakistani Taliban. They have the same worldview. They may have different tactics or strategy at this point of time. Afghan Taliban is totally focused on Afghanistan, while we, the Pakistani militants, which have scattered now over the last 1 year, we have seen that the force of or the Taliban strength has been broken. They're scattered. They are much more splintered than ever. But still, actually, any situation in Afghanistan, any instability, continuing instability in Afghanistan will have a direct bearing on Pakistan. So we cannot escape that. So that way, actually, I think probably there's a much greater understanding in Pakistan about the situation. And things have changed tremendously after President Ghani has taken over. We have seen, actually, quite distinctly that the tension which existed between Pakistan and Afghanistan under President Karzai has gone down. President Ashraf Ghani made it a point to come to Pakistan. I think probably it was the third country which he visited after China. After China, he visited Pakistan. So in a way, actually, that was a gesture. And if you read Ashraf Ghani's statement and his speeches, he's very categorical. He's very clear about it, that without Pakistan's cooperation, stability in Afghanistan will not be possible.
Thank you, Azad. Riaz Mohammad Khan Sahab, I would pose the same question to you, that given this reset in the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan, do you see that this is going to, in a very fundamental way, improve the security situation, improve the situation in the region, or are there other factors at play which will continue to destabilize the area?
Thank you, Nasim. Yeah, because I think it would be better this way. I think before I respond to your question, let me make a rather broader remark. When I saw this topic, Afghanistan, the Northwest exposure, which is quite intriguing. What is Northwest exposure? So I see it as a challenge, and this challenge has many dimensions, very grave. This challenge, I think, combines many factors which are regional and local, and also external. Many developments for which Pakistan is not responsible, and others for which Pakistan is responsible. But this is a challenge which really, in a way, intensifies the struggle for the soul of Pakistan, which has a much older history. Because you mentioned, are there other factors, etc., so we should not forget these aspects. And the way we are able to address this challenge, I think will determine whether we are able to orient ourselves with the imperatives of modernity, and or we simply remain caught in the eddy currents of the global progression, and only, as yesterday Anatol was saying, trundle slowly and miss out on this progression towards a betterment of societies. So this really is a very grave challenge that we face. I look at this whole development of the last 3 decades in 3 phases. The first phase is the Sahar revolution, the Soviet intervention, then the Soviet exit. There are many things one can talk about, but this is not the occasion. The second phase is 1990s, when we seem to have drawn wrong conclusions and we developed some of our own ambitions. Because Soviet Union broke apart, we thought the paradigm could be applied to Kashmir. There were certain encouragements here to policies which now are haunting us. Then we also saw at the same time that the thousands of Arab youths who had come to participate in the jihad, they coalesced into Al-Qaeda. Then we saw the rise of the Salafist movement, which had the undercurrent of this Saudi-Iran rivalry. Those factors, the rise of the Taliban, which is all part of the rising extremism and extremist violence, militancy that we see in Pakistan. Then we have the post 9/11. Again, a lot can be said about post 9/11, but we come directly to what is the situation today. Certainly, I think in the last 3 decades that we have been involved, certain conclusions are necessary to draw. One is that this conflict is hurting Pakistan more than any other country in the world except Afghanistan. So this is the first conclusion. Any measure, any policy, anything that we do which is going to lead to the continuation of this conflict is not in Pakistan's interest. So whether we talk about strategic depth, seeking strategic depth, or we allow our policies to slip into the ethnic divide, the Pashtun, non-Pashtun, etc., as you know, all these things, they are basically recipes for the continuation of the conflict. So I think now the lesson which was emerging, but it has, I think, come into a sharper relief, that it is in the interest of Pakistan that this conflict must end. Naturally, it is not going to end precipitously, but it should be nudged in that direction, and that Pakistan must deal with Afghanistan as and manage its relations as between two states, according to the norms of international relations. Now here, fortunately, we see that there is an upturn with the coming of Ashraf Ghani. There is an upturn in the relationship. But we must be mindful that Ashraf Ghani has certain expectations from Pakistan. If we have to sustain this trend, then we have to be responsive to those expectations. One expectation is in terms of reconciliation, in terms of using our influence on the Afghan Taliban to somehow restrain them. There is in the air talk about a spring offensive. If the spring offensive starts, there is a risk that this process may derail. Therefore, whatever we can do, we have to do in order to restrain these elements if we have any influence. Secondly, there are many other areas, economic areas, for example. They need certain facilities in Karachi. They need many other facilities in terms of facilitation of their clearances, trucks, etc. I hear a lot about that. Have we been able to expeditiously address all those grievances? We need to do that because Ashraf Ghani is also under pressure to show to his own people that his new direction in his policy, it is paying dividends. This is what I'll say.
Thank you. So, Anatol, as you see, like good Pakistanis, we are focusing more on Pakistan. I tried to broaden the debate, but I think our two panelists have given us a very good insight in terms of our own compulsions and our own approach. If looking at it from the outside, if I was to ask you how critical is the Taliban factor and where is the Taliban factor headed within Afghanistan and what does it do for Ashraf Ghani? And as Riaz Mohammad Khan Sahib just pointed out, the announcement of the spring offensive and actual action around that. And if you could bring in IS, Islamic State, if at all it's a factor there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasim. I would agree with Zahid that there is really no chance of the Taliban being able to capture again most or all of Afghanistan, a return to the situation of the summer of 2001. Apart from the forces arrayed against them in Afghanistan itself, there would be far more of an international coalition against that than was present in the 1990s. What I fear, however, is that they probably are capable of keeping an insurgency going in their own areas more or less indefinitely. I mean, certainly unless Pakistan were to take extremely strong military action on its side against them, which I can only see happening in very specific circumstances. So my fear is that all other things being equal, the war in Afghanistan will continue, and the Taliban probably is in a position not to take cities, but to extend its control over parts of the countryside. Now, on the other hand, as we've heard, there is a government in Afghanistan which is both more favourable to Pakistan, but is also, at least Ashraf Ghani, not necessarily Mr. Abdullah, much more interested in the possibility of some kind of peace agreement, a peace settlement with the Taliban. And with the exception of India, there's also a range of countries, including most notably, of course, the United States, who have also come around to that idea in principle. So, ideally, Pakistan could play a critical role in pushing forward a peace settlement in Afghanistan itself. Indeed, Pakistan has to for that to work. And there is also, of course, for the first time perhaps, or well, it's come up in recent years, there is more of a symmetry and a possibility of reciprocity with the Afghan state, because, as we know, just as a large part of the Afghan Taliban leadership is present in Pakistan, so of course a large part of the Pakistani Taliban leadership is now in Afghanistan. So there is a common state interest. It's not simply the one-sided thing that one saw previously. As to ISIS, my sense is that they will play a very limited role. There's loose talk in counter-terrorism circles in the West of ISIS replacing the Taliban. That's nonsense. You know, the Afghans are Afghans. They don't even like Arabs very much. But where I think ISIS could play an important and dangerous role is if indeed, and we do come to the point where there is a serious peace agreement on the table. That is bound, I mean, that will lead to really serious divisions within the regime in Kabul, but that would be also bound to lead to really, for the first time, open divisions in the Taliban itself. In those circumstances, I think you could see ISIS and indeed Al-Qaeda as well, possibly together with the Haqqani network, strengthening the rejectionist side, the side that would reject a peace settlement. In those circumstances, I think one could then see perhaps Afghanistan and Pakistan really coming together. But unfortunately, I have a nasty feeling that before enough of the Taliban would be ready to look at a peace settlement, there will indeed have to be a good deal more fighting, because at the moment it seems there are too many people in the Taliban who do still think they have a chance of winning militarily. They will need to be convinced otherwise before there is a real chance of peace.
Wasn't Osama an Arab? I heard you say that the Afghans hate the Arabs.
I didn't say they hated the Arabs, but I mean, if you talk to ex-Taliban and Taliban supporters, many
There's
of them...
There's a divide there.
Well, I mean, they are perfectly aware of the mess he got them into.
Yeah, absolutely. Zahid, moving, there was talk about ideally what is needed to ensure that the Taliban really can be tackled inside Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban. Ideally what is needed is Pakistan cooperating and Pakistan doing what is needed to be done vis-a-vis the Taliban. So you live in the world of practicality, you follow what's happening on the ground. Are you seeing Pakistan take the steps that are needed to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table? One, and in fact a preface to that is, does Pakistan exercise that kind of influence still? Thank you.
Thank you. I think Pakistan's influence over the Taliban, Afghan Taliban I'm talking about, is a bit exaggerated. They have certain influence, yes, actually, because we hosted them for so long. So we have certain influence, but and we can nudge them, we can actually push them to some extent, but it will depend on the Taliban themselves whether they would like to come on the negotiating table. Yes, Pakistan will have to make more efforts, no doubt about that. But and I think probably some major development had taken place very recently, and in a way, actually, Taliban have given some indication that they would like to talk, behind the scene, not actually in front of cameras or openly. But before it could start, somebody leaked a story to New York Times, and that was scuttled. So that's how sensitive they are, number one. So Pakistan can push them, but cannot decide on their behalf. The second thing is about Taliban's own problem. Taliban, look, actually, there's about 12 years of resistance in Afghanistan. The whole, there are so many top commanders, Afghan Taliban commanders have been killed or have been actually retired, whatever you can say. A new generation of Taliban commanders are basically controlling the battlefield. Mullah Omar, yes, to some one can say that still they owe their allegiance to Mullah Omar. He is the supreme leader. But it's very unclear whether he does command the same kind of authority as he used to do before the fall of Taliban government. Taliban commanders on the field, what I gather actually, talking to people, I have not met them, but basically quite a lot of them are very young. They may have started the resistance 12 years ago, then when they were teenagers, and now they are actually holding the command. And I think for it will also not be easy to decide for Mullah Omar to decide. And he has to take in consideration what is the thinking on the ground. And it's very difficult because the problem is that at this point of time particularly, to tell them, look, actually, now we have to sit on negotiative. There may be a question whether American forces are still there. So they have to have some justification. But I still believe that there could be a possibility of some kind of negotiation starting. It also depends on what is the situation in Kabul. If there continued instability, probably it will not give much incentive to the Taliban to come on the negotiating table. There's also a kind of tussle for balance of power looking at that. So it's a quite tricky situation. But I agree with Riaz Khan that, look, actually there's a lot of expectation in Afghanistan and from Pakistan, and also Mr. Ghani is surrounded by those people. I have been to many conferences and they all talk about Mr. Ghani has given too much to Pakistan. So that is kind of pressure he's also having there.
Riaz Sahab, coming back to this question of has Pakistan, you alluded to the fact that Pakistan needs to do enough and to do more, in fact, on the Taliban front to make this whole exercise of Pakistan, Afghanistan reset worthwhile for both the countries. Do you think Pakistan is doing what is needed to be done on the Taliban front?
Let me say that I am not really privy to all that maybe is being done by the government of Pakistan. But let me put it this way, that on Taliban, I agree with Zahid that Pakistan has some influence, but Pakistan is not in a position to coerce them to accept a certain solution. That is not possible. But there is something else that Pakistan can do. And that something else is that they do not abuse our hospitality, that they do not use our territory for operations inside Afghanistan. This is very important, and here we should be seen to be doing something. So that is one aspect, and I'm sure that if we seriously try to interdict this kind of movement, then it will have an impact on the thinking of the Taliban themselves. There are other positive factors. Now China is also interested in pushing the reconciliation process forward. Secondly, I do agree, and I have written about it, that Taliban have absolutely no chance to return to Kabul the way that they had been in the 90s. There is no question about it. They will have their influence here and there in patches within Afghanistan, but with the kind of operations that they are capable of launching, which are unlike the kind of operations that they were able to launch in the 1990s, where they used to move in a strength of 10,000, 15,000, and they could lay siege of cities. That is no longer possible. So with these kinds of operations, they simply cannot dislodge the Kabul government. Secondly, the international environment has changed. Kabul is no longer isolated as it was in the 1990s. So if the Taliban try to do something, there would be an intervention from outside. Therefore, Taliban, I think some of the elements of the Taliban, they should be rational enough to be responsive to this kind of argument and this kind of pressure, particularly from Pakistan, and if there are other countries who can do this.
I
Actually, just to both you and Zahid, a follow-up question, either of you can respond to this. On the one hand, there's both of you agree that Pakistan does not exercise too much influence on the Taliban, which is correct. And I mean, I've met their former Taliban ministers, etc. They loathe Pakistan. They are very, very, negative, to put it mildly. But the question really is, operationally, when we say, does Pakistan exercise any influence or not, the issue is, can they sit on our territory and conduct operations? Because ultimately that's, that's what Afghanistan, Kabul expects from us, and all sane Pakistanis expect this as well from the state. So is the state taking action on those fronts, Zahid?
I don't think there's such thing actually that any action against the Afghan Taliban is taking place. There's also a dilemma for that. I will say, like they should, and the Pakistan territory should not be allowed to for the cross-border attacks anyway. And one should also try to stop. And one of the things Pakistan needed to do, and probably we are moving in the right direction, is taking control of our tribal areas. Unless we have the control over tribal areas, we cannot actually stop them. So sealing up the border means at least we should have the authority. Should have the control over our tribal area. That's the first thing we can stop. The second thing is that it's a catch-22 situation also. I mean, yes, actually we have been hosting them, but we can warn them not to use them, but we cannot actually also arrest them or hand over to Kabul or kill them, for example, because on the one side we have under pressure to bring them on the negotiating table. But if we start taking them or action against them, that will become much more difficult for Pakistan to have any kind of say in that. So I think it's a very, what I say, dangerous territory we have to trade on. And the thing is that again, the major problem, I think probably even if Pakistan is able to completely stop their operation, one should also understand actually that they have actually their base area inside Afghanistan. What is happening in Helmand? What is happening in Kandahar? What is happening in some areas of northern Afghanistan? So all those things actually, they may be to some extent have some logistical support from Pakistani militant group or Pakistani Taliban or Pakistani religious parties. They have, there's no doubt about that. We should stop them. But it is to say that they're totally dependent on this side, it's not correct.
Yeah. I agree with this. You see, Pakistan cannot take responsibility for the bases that the Taliban may be having inside Afghanistan. But what we need to do is do all that is possible to interdict their movement, their operations from this side. And in this, I think one critical factor is the coordination between Pakistani army, which is in a very large number in the FATA area. We have about 170,000 troops, and also the Afghan army on the other side. And this is also important for us because if this kind of movement continues, operations from this side, then we can be quite sure that there would be a reaction and there would be operations from the other side. The Afghans would say they would not accept our word that we are doing everything, but then they might be renewing the kind of mischief that we have seen from the other side. So even to block that mischief or neutralize that, it is very important that we should be doing all that is possible not to allow operations from our side. Otherwise, I also understand the thing which once General Mahmood had said, that it is extremely difficult to argue with men of faith. So here there are far too many men of faith among the Taliban, but I think there are also reasonable Taliban, and even in 2002 we had thought that the United States and others, they should have brought these reconcilable Taliban into the fold of the Bonn process, but at that time we had lost our voice in the international arena.
The international arena ended up almost being proven wrong. Yeah, and I think General Mahmood is right. It's difficult to argue with men of faith and men who are in the business of power play, and we know about both in our country. Anatol, you want to add something to this? But I have another question for you. That we've always heard about Pakistan's, double play, etc., in Afghanistan, but we know that the United States was playing a double game in Afghanistan as well, vis-a-vis Pakistan and Afghanistan, etc. What is the thinking in Washington right now in terms of its own policy, in terms of Pakistan and Afghanistan as well?
Well, I mean, on the first point, before you asked your question, I was just going to mention the little elephant in the room, who has been trumpeting in my ear in the background, the name of which is, of course, ISI. Or the Pakistani military establishment, because I'm afraid that it is pretty much universally believed in official circles and among experts in the West that Pakistan's role with the Afghan Taliban has gone considerably beyond shelter in certain regards, and that in fact there has been direct help to the Haqqani network in particular to attack Indian targets in Afghanistan. Now, I would say that two things there. One is that has to stop. Maybe it already has stopped. We haven't seen such attacks, for quite some time now. But it certainly has to stop if there is to be any possibility, well, amongst other things, of India and Pakistan talking together over Afghanistan, or to some extent over anything else. But secondly, and I've said this very strongly in Delhi as well, that on the other hand, as we've heard, as I strongly believe, there is a real desire in Pakistan now for an Afghan peace settlement. There is a willingness to nudge, as we've heard, that forward. And that from both the Indian and the Pakistani side, a dialogue in Afghanistan is necessary if there is to be a chance of a peace settlement. Because, of course, as we all know, so much of what has been driving Pakistani policy over the years, or Pakistani military policy in Afghanistan, is fear of India, is fear of encirclement by India, which I have to say, I mean, given India's links to sections of the Afghan government, the intelligence service, the military, is not totally unfounded. One must not dismiss this simply as paranoia. As to the US, what we have seen, most importantly over the past year, is that in part under pressure from the US military, in part under pressure from the dreadful example of what has happened to US client states in the Middle East, Obama has been forced to continue a much greater military involvement in Afghanistan than he had hoped. One should remember that President Obama's plan was to end the American military presence completely next year. He's been convinced that would be extremely dangerous and could in fact lead to a collapse of the Afghan regime, or at least the loss of very significant territory. At the same time, I mean, the underlying desire in Washington it is basically to reduce as far as possible America's commitment there, for very obvious reasons. If you look around the world, they've got Ukraine, they've got what's happening in the Middle East, they have no idea what to do about that. They've got the rise of China, and so forth and so on. And so I think that you will see the United States, really hanging on just to make absolutely sure that there could be no Saigon scenario, of an actual collapse and humiliation. But, with a new openness at the same time to the possibility of a peace settlement. On the other hand, one may also see, simply because they have so much else on their plate, and unfortunately over the years one's seen that America, despite its huge foreign and security establishment, is not very good at doing more than two or sometimes even more than one thing at the same time. So one may see a diminution actually of the American diplomatic presence, the efforts that would be necessary in India, amongst other places, in order to actually drive a settlement forward.
We seem to be seeing the US create messes in more than one or two places simultaneously, but in terms of India, Anatol, you mentioned President Ashraf Ghani goes to India tomorrow, And it's interesting in the Indian press what you're reading. It's time for Ashraf Ghani to make up for his mistakes in the last few months. He's gotten too close to Pakistan. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. Ji, Riaz Sahib, you wanted to say something?
Very brief comment. The mention was made about ISI. We are not talking about the past, but the current policies. Is the ISI autonomous of the army? Now, if we take the posture of the army today, the visits of the army chief and also of the ISI chief to Kabul, etc., then I wonder that we would be really playing a double game or anything. Secondly, Pakistan has a concern about the Indian intelligence activity. But I think in order to check that Indian intelligence activity, the route lies through, or answer lies through Kabul. Not that we start doing something ourselves to try to neutralize. Thirdly, I think in terms of the India-Afghanistan relationship, we have to be sensitive to one aspect, and that is that Afghanistan has important economic interests with India. And I think Pakistan should not be exercising a veto on the economic relationship, because that is a very normal activity among countries, state-to-state relations.
I entirely agree. Absolutely.
Thank you. Before I open the floor for questions, may I request, actually, can the mic be brought to Riaz Khokhar Sahib, please? Riaz Khokhar Sahib, you've been obviously following China very closely, and at this point, China's role seems to be pretty significant in Afghanistan in terms of also future of Afghanistan and peacemaking, etc. Would you like to tell us a bit more about how China is, operating in the present context in terms of Afghanistan?
I think the fact that the Chinese have stepped in, although I would be a little cautious here, I don't think they would want to burn their fingers in Afghanistan. They have been, to some extent, been persuaded by the United States, persuaded by some Western countries as well, and Pakistan, that China is a country that has no baggage in Afghanistan. So I think there is a plus point there. But my own feeling is that China on its own will not be able to deliver too much. I think they're depending on Pakistan. And here again, the question boils down to what the panelists have already talked about. How much influence does Pakistan really have on the Taliban? Now, let's face some realities. The mess in Afghanistan was not created by Pakistan. We were just part of it, but we did not really contribute to it in a big way. That's one reality. The second reality is that Pakistan is not a country that is very much liked in Afghanistan today. I think we should have no illusions. This is certainly I'm not an Afghanistan hand like my distinguished colleague Riaz Mohammad Khan, who's really our only expert. But my own feeling of my interaction with some of the Afghans abroad has given me the clear impression that they don't want Pakistan to play a role. In fact, some young Afghans that I have met recently, and I think this is quite obvious these days, that the young Afghans from these think tanks and all are circulating, and they quite clearly say, we feel Ghani has gone too far. We feel that he's got a very narrow window, and he ought to be careful. And I think the sort of unity government in Afghanistan, that in itself is a big question mark. Ghani, I think he's one of the most decent persons. I wish we had a Ghani, an honest person, committed, very able, there's no doubt about it. But I think he doesn't really have the, shall we say, the political constituency in Afghanistan. So these are some of the issues. But I have a feeling, although the Chinese representative, who's the special representative of Afghanistan, is a little vocal. I mean, if you meet him, you'll find that he's very exuding confidence, etc. But my own feeling is that the Chinese will only be able to deliver if we are able to help them. And my own feeling, I agree with the panelists, we can push the Taliban up to a point, but no further. That's my impression. Well, I would say that, to some extent, I think the support to the Haqqani group has dwindled considerably. But please don't forget, the Afghans also have a counter today. They have the TTP. Now, who's created TTP? Is it the Afghan intelligence that has created TTP? Or is it the United States? Or a combination of countries? So there is this problem. And I think this matter will have to be resolved. My last point is that we should try not to let down China. Because I think there is a certain responsibility on Pakistan. And I'm sure, I'm not sure about the political leadership in Pakistan, how committed they are to any kind of settlements, or whether they're even in a position to influence things in Pakistan. But certainly...
Things in Pakistan, you think it's...
Well, clearly, I mean, let's not fool ourselves. The military is in charge. Yeah, no, I'm quite clear that they're in charge and they have a heavy responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Floor is open for questions. Please introduce yourself, and please may I again request brief questions. Thank you. Yeah, Mike Lam, please.
Sayyid Manzoor ka khail. We come to the point that dialogue, not war or proxies, are the result or should be the answer of Pak-Afghan bilateral relations. And I think that confidence building measures which we took to India's relation should be taken to Afghan relations as well. And we should play, it should be mostly from our side as an elderly brother responsible role in the bilateral relations, as well as interfaith harmony and youth economic empowerment is need of the day for both countries, because 67% of the population, average population of Pakistan and Afghanistan is youth, and there should be some deputing youth ambassadors for both countries for strengthening our relations.
Thank you. Next question, this was the comment. Ji. Idhar le aayega. Ji. It's open.
What I have heard from the panelists and especially from Mr. Khokhar, I find there are contradictions of terms. Because at the one point you say that Taliban are scattered, they have no unified leadership, and they have very limited influence and maybe in the countryside. And at the same time, you say that we need to influence the Taliban. On the other hand, we also pretend that we are dealing with the Taliban evenly. We have no distinctions between the Taliban. And still we hope that we will be able to influence the Taliban. On the other side, there is also being said that maybe many Afghans would not like Pakistan to play any role in reconciliation process because of the past experience. Still we are trying to help the Chinese, and we are saying that Chinese will not be able to succeed in their mission unless we help them. So what's that contradiction?
Okay, thank you. Again, I'd repeat, please brief questions, introduce yourself, and let us know which panelist you'd like the question responded by. Zahid, very quickly, do you have a response to that? Very quickly.
I think there was hardly any contradiction. When I was talking about Taliban is scattered, I was referring to Pakistani Taliban. But as far as the Afghan Taliban are concerned, I said actually that still they owe their allegiance to Mullah Omar. He may not have the same kind of authority as he has to consult with that. It does not mean that that they are scattered or there are maybe factions, but.
Thank you. Also, I think, Zehra, we have to keep in mind that the world everything is in black and white, and there are multiple factors at play. So there are a lot of gray areas. It may seem like a contradiction, but I think all these elements exist simultaneously.
I have a very brief question. Yeah, I have a name. I'm Kahar Zalmi, I'm a journalist. My question to you, sir, Khan Saab. Has Pakistan made up its mind to divorce its connection with Taliban, knowing that Haqqani network has been moved to Upper Kurum, and the Afghan Taliban, we are well aware that they are based in Quetta and Karachi. So how confident you are that Pakistan is willing, Pakistan means the army, is willing to divorce the Afghan Taliban?
Basically, the argument that I was making was not that we should oust the Afghan Taliban from Pakistan. That is not possible. Given so many factors, our own conditions here, there is a lot of empathy, sympathy, whatever you may call it, for the Afghan Taliban in Pakistan. Then there is the Pashtun sentiment, etc. But the argument that I was making was that whatever influence we may be having, we should use it in favor of reconciliation. And the argument that has been made that if we want the Chinese to do it, and we ourselves are somewhat unsure, then that doesn't make sense. We have to do our part, only then the others can do their part. The second thing which I emphasized was that we must not allow the operations which have been taking place from the Pakistan side. The Haqqani network operating from here, based here, that kind of activity, if we sort of overlook, then it is certainly going to derail this upturn which has taken place under Ghani in our relationship with the Afghans. Secondly, I think I would also say that we have to think hard. There is no doubt what Ambassador, the Foreign Secretary Khokhar had said, that the Afghans have a negative view of Pakistan. Yes, there is a whole history. But if we start from that premise, then we would lead to a rather pessimistic conclusion. But we have a certain stake in the future of this region. We have a certain stake in the future of Pakistan, surely, and it is linked with whatever happens in the region. Therefore, we have to start with a certain confidence that things can change, and we should at least try to make that change. And there may be just a very slim possibility with the change of events, turn of events, that may now be available to us, and we should see to it that it is sustained, it is strengthened, reinforced rather than derailed.
Thank you. The person at the back, Ji. उन्हें दे दीजिएगा जी.
My question is from Zahid Hussain, for example. My question is from Zahid Hussain about he is using these Oriental.
Can't hear you.
Yes, my question is from Zahid Hussain, for example. He is using.
Are you a student?
Yes. He is using Orientalist terminologies, for example, by demarcating that these are tribal areas. For example, my question is what this tribal area means exactly, how do they perceive this? And secondly, he is depicting in one sense that there is a war between civilization and barbarians. For example, and he has mentioned the word control to Fatah. My question is that, for example, there are 1,000 military checkposts and 1,000 of drones are operating there, 1,000 of people are killed there. What type of control no they further want?
Zahid will answer the question, but he didn't use the word barbarians, but your point is well taken. You mean that, you know, there's enough there in terms of presence of force, and what control do you want?
I think, yes, I never used those words, and I never meant that. As far as the problems of Fatah are concerned, we can have another session on that. I was not talking on Fatah problem. There are lots of problems. And what I was referring to was just actually having control over our borders. And because if we don't have the control over the border, how are we expected to stop this kind of cross-border incursion? it does not mean, it is going to be a long debate actually, what the tribal areas are that needed another session.
Okay. Yes, Nino. Yeah.
Okay, Nilofer Afridi Qazi. I was going to make one comment and ask a question which I think this gentleman sort of made reference to. When you have a discussion on Afghanistan, the players are usually Pakistan, ISI, India, and the United States or Europe. But recently, there has been a very clear understanding that Balochistan, which is hardly discussed in this country, has a factor in this. And so I was curious that neither one of you four actually mentioned Balochistan at all. So it's another form of silencing that even in our minds, where whether we are parking people there or they're very much over 50% of the population of Balochistan aren't Baloch, if that is a factor at all, or what's happening there in terms of training, et cetera, like there was absolutely no mention of it. And the second point, and a question, was there is no Pashtun sentiment in terms of support for the Taliban. This is the complete and utter rubbish. I mean, not only does President Ghani clearly state that position, but if in your own admission that policy in Pakistan is determined by an army, in majority who are Punjabi and who are making policies in Afghanistan and in the country, there is no Pashtun sentiment in terms of supporting barbarians or Taliban. So I appreciate, as a Pakistani and as a Pathan, that please do not advocate and push this nonsense. With respect.
Yeah, okay. I would, Nilofer, we got, no, yeah. I got the point, but I would just like to say that I think it's only polite that when we are raising, irrespective of what your opinion is, I don't appreciate the use of words like rubbish, etc. You're talking to people, I think it's just not nice. Your point of view is absolutely your own, and you should stay with that, and I'll request the panelists to respond to it. Riaz, Mohammad Khan sir, would you like to respond to it? To the question that there's no... no, the question is, no, I think she's raising a valid point. The question is that, when you say that there is a sentiment, there's a support, Pashtun support for Taliban, Nilofer is arguing there is no Pashtun support for Taliban who are essentially barbarians.
Okay. Yeah, the Pashtun support. Now, I'll take you back to the 2001, 9/11. One of the things, and I have many friends who are Pashtuns, and I know many people from Peshawar. One of the very strong sentiment following the dislodging of the Taliban from Kabul was that what the Americans have done is wrested the control of Kabul from the hands of Pashtuns and passed it on to the non-Pashtuns, the Tajiks. Now, we allowed our policy to slip into this ethnic divide. And I am one of the strongest critics of so-called playing the Pashtun card. It is not going to help you, because in Afghanistan there are not just Pashtuns, there are many other nationalities, and this is none of Pakistan's business. You also know the kind of sentiment that we had towards Northern Alliance, and the negativity which is coming is partly because, and the Ambassador Khokhar mentioned about it, outside the diaspora, Afghan diaspora. Afghan diaspora is partly the people who are educated Afghans and partly the people who are also non-Pashtuns. The only time that I have heard Pakistan being abused, literally abused, in a press conference in my whole career of 40 years was by the Afghans in Washington, when Sattar Saab was addressing a press conference over there, and I happened to be sitting over there. I can understand their feeling because they thought that at that time when the Taliban were in power, that Pakistan's policy were aimed at decimating the non-Pashtuns in Afghanistan, politically. So let us not turn our face that this whole problem and issue, it doesn't have ethnic underpinnings. There are ethnic underpinnings. And the important thing is that we should move our policy away from that, and we should try to treat Afghanistan as another country. So that is my thing. If we are realistic, I think we cannot. After all, we are all human beings. We have our own ethnicities, and therefore we cannot remove ourselves from that. And those kinds of prejudice, they sometimes play, but they play in manners that they can have negative consequences.
Thank
so
you,
that
Riaz.
needs to be avoided.
Thank you. I think I'd love to take more questions, but the organizers keep telling me it's time to wind up the session.
Sorry,
very quick.
All I want to say was I
quick.
strongly support that last statement.
Okay, well, Mr. Anatol Lieven supports the statement. I'd only like to conclude with this one comment that, when textbooks are written in policy making, surely Pakistan's policy of the 80s in Afghanistan is a classic case of how states blunder and then suffer from it. Thank you.
People can say this kind of thing.
Thank you very much, panelists and audience, for being with us for this session. Our next session starts in 10 minutes. The session is 1947, The Blood-Stained Dawn. The panelists are Intizar Hussain, Masood Asher, Arfa Sayyida Zehra, and Urvashi Batalia. The session is moderated by Asif Farooqi.